they do is surveys of civil literacy in America. They perform an annual test, and they go all across the country. They survey and test thousands of Americans. The test is pretty simple. It contains 33 questions, and they're designed to measure basic knowledge, just basic things about America's founding principles and our political history and international relations and market economy, all those things. Here's what they found out. 71% of Americans fail the basic civil literacy test. 71%. So they go out across the country, they take 10 Americans at random, and more than 7 out of 10 fail the test. Nationwide, the average score is only 49%. Okay? Now, these are some of the sample findings. These are some of the things that came off the test. Less than half of adult Americans right now can name all 3 branches of government. Less than half. Only 21% know that the phrase government of the people, by the people, and for the people comes from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Only 55% know that Congress shares authority over U.S. foreign policy with the President. Now, here's the frightening thing about this stat. Almost a quarter, okay, about 25% of Americans who took the test answered that they think Congress shares this power with the United Nations. Okay, that's pretty scary. Less than 1 in 5, now this won't surprise you, less than 1 in 5 Americans know that the phrase, a wall of separation between church and state, comes from a letter by Jefferson. You probably know it was a personal letter that he wrote to the Danbury Baptist Association. What Jefferson was referring to is he said the government should not interfere in the affairs of the church, and not the other way around. But almost half of Americans incorrectly believe that you can find separation of church and state, the wall of separation metaphor, in the Constitution. And of course, that's blatantly false. Now, these numbers are scary. They're also frighteningly consistent, no matter which organization does the polling. Now, here's some Gallup poll numbers. The Gallup polling organization, as you know, is a big national group. 2 years ago, last year, July of 2009, they determined that 66% of American adults have no idea that the words "we hold these truths" come from the Declaration. They don't recognize that. They don't know the origin of it at all. 45% of college seniors know that the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness come from the Declaration. So we have an alarming amount of really ignorance. I mean, constitutional illiteracy is what we could call it. Now, this headline is going to shock you. I hope this shocks you. It did me. 77% of Oklahoma high schoolers cannot tell you that George Washington was the first president. Okay? Now, we can't laugh at Oklahoma, okay, because, any state, I imagine if you conduct a similar poll across the nation, the results are going to be the same. But listen to this. I know this language is small. This was a group, the Oklahoma Council on Public Affairs, September 2009, okay, a year ago. They asked high school students basic questions about U.S. history and the structure of our government and all this. And the questions were taken from a test, here's the catch, that immigrants have to take to become U.S. citizens. Now, you have to answer 6 out of 10 questions right to pass the test. And according to Immigration Service, 92% of immigrants pass on the first try. According to the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs, only 3% of Oklahoma high school students would have passed the test on the first try. Now, here's the 10 questions, and I won't go through all of them, and the font is small, but here's the basic questions. What's the supreme law of the land? Okay, only 28% of the students got that one right. What do we call the first 10 amendments of the Constitution? What are the 2 parts of the U.S. Congress? How many justices are on the Supreme Court? Only 10% of high school students could tell you there are 9 Supreme Court justices. Who wrote the Declaration of Independence? Only 14% of the kids got it right. What ocean is on the east coast of the U.S.? That's pretty scary. At least 61% got that one right. What are the 2 major political parties in the United States? Only 43% of students got that right. We elect a U.S. senator for how many years? Nobody knows. Who was the first president of the United States? 23%. Who's in charge of the executive branch? 29% of high school students know that the president is in charge. So, look, again, it's easy to bash the results, but maybe we shouldn't do this test in Louisiana, okay? We don't want to know the results, all right? Thank you. I got a little hoop for Ronald Reagan. I appreciate that. All right. An informed patriotism is what we want. We've got a problem, obviously, when it comes to our civil literacy. And we have a huge need today to return to our founding principles. This is a matter, you and I can talk about this. Why does this matter to us? Why should we care? Because our freedom, our liberty hangs in the balance. If we don't know who we are and where we've come from, we cannot know where we're going. And we're not going to be able to secure the blessings of liberty, as the preamble to the Constitution says, if we're not informed. But Reagan said this in his farewell address. He said, this is what we need. We don't just need patriotism. We need informed patriotism. And let me warn you, I'm going to quote the Gipper, President Reagan, a lot tonight, because he was the great communicator, and he had a knack for summarizing broad principles in really simple language. That I like that a lot. Okay, so I thought this evening, in the very short time we have together, this is what I thought we would do. I'm going to take 5 foundational principles, these unchanging foundations that we talk about, that serve as the basis for the Constitution and our form of government. We're going to go through them quickly, but I just want to give you just 5 thoughts, an outline and review of those underlying core principles that have sustained us for this long. And I'm going to begin with one that's an essential principle regarding our interpretation of the Constitution itself. Now, this has become a big matter of controversy in recent years, okay? But you hear this idea about original intent, or originalism, or strict constructionism, or contextualism. There will be a test on all these terms, okay? Basically what this means is this. I believe, I'm a strict constructionist, I'm an originalist. I believe that the Constitution means what it says, and it says what it means. You see, the big battle right now in the law, the fundamental question today, is are we going to follow the original design and wisdom and intent of our founders that we just talked about, or are we going to reject and depart from it entirely? That's the battle that's going on right now in the courts and in the culture. And we say, sadly, too many people have decided that we should chart a new course. The Constitution is not a living, breathing document. It doesn't change with the times. It doesn't change with the whims of political correctness and whomever happens to be in charge at the moment. That's what gets people in trouble, okay? The Constitution is a set and stable anchor and foundation. It does not change. It has concrete terms and conditions for governing that cannot be abandoned, ignored, or rewritten. It doesn't matter what the popular culture says at any given time. If the Constitution has any imperfection, we've got a cure for that. The people can amend the document. But a judge should not be able to do that on his own personal whim. That's called judicial fiat. You know, you've got judges today, federal judges and lower court judges, they go into these cases and it's almost like they've got to interpret like some sort of cave drawing or something. You know, like the Constitution is this really mysterious thing, and they've got to decide upon the penumbras of the actual language and writings that are there, and it's just nonsense. The Constitution is very well written. The words are very precise. They have very certain meanings. And we abandon those meanings at our peril. It's not a living, breathing document. Listen to what some of the founders themselves said. This is Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story. He was called a father of American jurisprudence. He was placed on the Supreme Court by President James Madison. And he said this about constitutional interpretation, quote, "The Constitution is to be interpreted by endeavoring to ascertain the true sense and meaning of all the terms. And we are neither to narrow them nor enlarge them, for the purpose of adding to or diminishing its powers or bending them to any favorite theory or dogma or party." Madison himself was the chief architect of the Constitution. He said this, quote, "I entirely concur in the propriety of resorting to the sense in which the Constitution was accepted and ratified by the nation. In that sense alone, it is the legitimate Constitution." Jefferson said the same thing. He concurred. He said, look, on every question of construction, we have to carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted. Recollect the spirit manifested in the debates. And instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, which is happening a lot today, conform to the probable one in which it was passed. Too many jurists today ignore this simple principle, and it's led to all sorts of absurd results. These judges, even Supreme Court justices, can look into the Constitution and read into the Constitution rights that were never there. Here's one absurd example just recently from 2005. You may have heard of the Kelo versus City of New London, Connecticut case. It's the eminent domain case, okay, where the Supreme Court decided by majority, a razor-thin majority, that the government now has the right to take your private property if they deem it appropriate for whatever use they want to make of it. Justice Thomas wrote a scathing dissent in the opinion, and he said this, quote, "When faced with a clash of constitutional principle and a line of unreasoned cases wholly divorced from the text, history, and structure of our founding document, the courts should not hesitate to resolve the tension in favor of the Constitution's original meaning." In other words, the Constitution means what it says. We should not get away from it. All right, let me move on. Second principle that I wanted to talk about tonight is of equal importance. And that is the ultimate question of what is the source of our liberty? Okay, first of all, a lot of people today can't agree on what liberty is, right? I had a debate a few years ago against the national president of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. They're on the other side of the spectrum of us, if you weren't clear about that. Ms. Strawson is a law professor in New York. She was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential women of the 20th century and all that. The debate was in upstate Pennsylvania at Susquehanna University, and they invited us in, and we were there to debate a very important topic. Should the government have the right to regulate hardcore pornography to protect children? That was the subject of the debate. Now you and I, the answer to that is very simple and logical, of course. I mean, God ordained civil government to protect the citizenry, and who are we going to protect? Who's the most important? Young children, of course. Yes, the government has the right to do that. Well, the ACLU argues the other side. And they argue that the government should have no ability to regulate any of that, even child pornography and all these horrible, heinous things that we can't even talk about tonight, because, hey, that's somebody's liberty interest. And you and I may not be into that, but some people are. And so if they want to pursue that liberty interest, they should have the right to do it. And so she argued in the course of this debate that even sadomasochistic pornography and all these terrible things should be completely protected by the First Amendment. She wishes, she qualified, that child pornography wasn't produced, but once it is, it should be fully protected by the First Amendment, and everyone should have the right to do that. Now, do you think the founders would have agreed with that obscene notion? Of course not. Because liberty is not the freedom to do what we want, it's the freedom to do what we ought. See, the founders understood that there was a ceiling upon our personal liberty. It's called religion and morality. And those also happen to be the foundations of our entire republic. But all of that goes back to this idea that the source of our liberty is God himself. Because, see, if you deny that there is a God, then there is no right and wrong, and then all of that stuff really kind of makes logical sense to you, right? The founders didn't believe that. In fact, we have to remember that our nation's birth certificate, the Declaration of Independence, was founded upon a very important principle. And at the time, this too was a revolutionary idea. But look, the basis of the Declaration was this, and you know this language well. We hold these truths to be self-evident. What is self-evident?